The town's land was once fertile, sustaining generations of families, but now it was under threat. Large agricultural corporations were buying out small farmers at rock-bottom prices, drowning them in debt until they had no choice but to sell. Banks were canceling loans, and whispers spread that the government had turned its back on the farmers. Jacob Turner was one of the town's oldest farmers. Like his father and grandfather before him, he had dedicated his life to the land. But now, he was fighting for the last piece of his farm. For years, he had struggled to keep his family afloat, his wife and 2 children depending on every last crop he could grow. But the bank was demanding payment, and if he couldn't settle his debt soon, he would lose everything. But Jacob wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. Together with other farmers in the town, he had formed a coalition, determined to resist the corporations trying to crush them. Their only wish was to keep their land, to continue farming for the future generations. Yet their defiance would make them powerful enemies. In the town square, the farmers organized a strike. They lined up their tractors along the road and raised their signs. "The land belongs to us, not for sale." But no one knew that this fight would end in tragedy. The strike had sent shockwaves through the town. Farmers parked their tractors in the center of the square, holding up their banners. Some townspeople supported them, while others feared the situation would spiral out of control. But the farmers' resolve was unwavering. However, the large agricultural corporations weren't going to let this resistance last too long. To them, a handful of farmers in a small town were insignificant. If one resisted, they would make an example out of him to crush the rest. Local authorities stepped in. The town sheriff approached the farmers, his voice stern. "Listen, folks, this might be your land, but you're making things difficult. If this strike continues, you'll all face serious consequences." Jacob Turner stepped forward, locking eyes with the sheriff. "This land was passed down from our fathers. We're not giving it up that easily." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "Remember this, Jacob. Resistance doesn't always end well." But the farmers didn't back down. That night, tension at the strike camp ran high. Jacob and a few of his fellow farmers parked their tractors and took turns keeping watch. They took shifts sleeping, prepared for any sabotage attempts. After midnight, 2 headlights appeared in the distance. A black-tinted SUV rolled up in front of the tractors. The doors opened, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out, walking toward Jacob with slow, deliberate strides. "Mr. Turner," one of them said, fixing his gaze on Jacob, "we need to have a private discussion." Jacob crossed his arms over his chest. "You can speak right here in front of everyone. We've got nothing to hide." The man smirked slightly. "I see you're a stubborn one, but right now you're playing a game, and you don't want to be the little fish against the big players." Jacob felt the unease in his gut. "What exactly are you trying to say?" "Look, buddy," the man continued, lowering his voice, "if you walk away from this, it'll be better for everyone. For you, your family, your friends. We can offer you a good sum of money, but if you insist on fighting, things might get complicated." Jacob clenched his jaw. "If I wanted to sell this land for money, I would have done it already. Like everyone here, I work to survive. This is my home, my legacy." The man nodded, slipping a business card from his pocket. "Keep this. If you change your mind, call us. But remember, time is running out." The men climbed back into the SUV and drove off, disappearing into the night. Jacob looked at the card in his hand. No names, just a phone number. That night, he slept uneasily. The men's words echoed in his mind. Was this just a warning, or were they really coming for him and his family? And the next morning, in the town's main square, a tragedy struck. The farmers gathered at the protest site with their tractors, and at the front stood Jacob Turner. All eyes were on him. Despite the intimidation from large corporations, they had refused to back down. Then, out of nowhere, a truck roared into the square at high speed. Shouts erupted as people noticed a massive tractor moving uncontrollably. It was heading straight for Jacob. "Jacob, move!" someone screamed. But it was too late. The tractor veered off course and toppled over onto Jacob. Dust and debris filled the air as horrified gasps rang out across the square. For a few moments, everything was silent. Minutes later, the town's doctor and emergency responders arrived, but there was nothing they could do. Jacob was gone. The police report classified it as an accident, but the farmers knew better. This wasn't an accident. This was a message, a warning, a murder. The town was swallowed by grief. Jacob's wife collapsed to the ground in tears, clutching at his lifeless body, while his children sobbed beside him. And as the town mourned, a tour bus approached in the distance. Willie Nelson had arrived. For decades, Willie Nelson had been a fierce advocate for farmers' rights. Through his farm aid movement, he had dedicated his life to fighting for struggling agricultural workers. But when he stepped off his bus and saw the grieving town, he knew something was deeply wrong. Newspapers had already picked up on Jacob Turner's tragic death, but as Willie read the headlines, his stomach twisted. The media was distorting the truth. At the protest site, he met with the farmers, their faces heavy with sorrow. Jacob's best friend stepped forward, lowering his voice. "This wasn't an accident, Willie." They silenced him. Willie's jaw clenched. He had seen injustice before, but this was something else. This was murder, and he wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. The next day, he called for a nationwide press conference. Millions of people tuned in as he spoke, his voice unwavering. Jacob Turner didn't die in an accident. He was a farmer fighting to keep his land, a good man, a father, and he was killed because big corporations wanted to silence him. But we won't let them. The truth started spreading. Protests erupted across the country. Government officials were pressured into responding. But Willie had an even bigger plan. To amplify the farmers' voices, Willie Nelson announced a massive benefit concert. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people gathered. Messages of support flooded in from across the nation. Soon, the #sign Justice for Jacob went viral, exposing the corruption behind large agricultural corporations. Investigative journalists dug deeper, and the truth came to light. And then the biggest breakthrough came. Jacob Turner's case was reopened. During the trial, a whistleblower, an insider from the corporation, came forward, revealing that the so-called accident had been orchestrated to intimidate farmers. The evidence was undeniable. The company's executives were exposed, legal action followed, and heavy penalties were imposed. Jacob's family was awarded a significant settlement, but more importantly, the company's empire began to crumble. For the farmers, this wasn't just about money. It was about justice. Jacob had fought for his land, and in the end, he had won. As Willie Nelson prepared to leave town, he turned back one last time. The land was still there, untouched, protected, a living legacy. And with a quiet smile, he whispered, "This land is worth fighting for, and we will never lose it."